Okay, we've all heard of this. Probably most of us have now seen the video. Let's get past the Tory bullshit and let's actually have a look at what was said.
Ed, thank you for coming to talk to us here in the run-up to the elections. Very grateful for you.
Pleasure.
You must be bloody worn out, are you?
No, busy, but I'm glad to be here.
A lot of us feel that what's happened in politics is that there's these unelected, powerful elites that really control things from behind the scenes, not in a conspiratorial way, just in an economic way. And those powerful elites have really got their talons into the Tory party. For me, and for a lot of people that don't vote, that's where that frustration emanates from. It certainly isn't apathy, Ed. It's a sense of, what's the point? What we feel is like, well, the suffragettes, they may have given their lives for the right to vote. The people in power worked out, okay, we've got to give votes to women. Let's just now make sure that their votes mean very little.
Look how bored Ed Miliband is throughout this little rant.
And and since then, since suffrage, since the right of women to vote, what has meaningfully occurred?
That's totally wrong.
Go on, mate.
Well, look, workers' rights, a national health service, a minimum wage, lesbian and gay rights. Now, look, the whole point about this is they happen. I don't actually take the view that some politicians take, which is all about the great politicians who make the change happen. Of course, it's people that make it happen, but it's a combination of politics and people. And look, those changes, the suffragettes, incredibly important moment, the right for women to vote. But think about the Equal Pay Act in the 1970s, Barbara Castle, right? It took the
still ain't fully happened.
Okay, but hang on a minute.
For women.
It took the workers at Ford to make it happen, to push Barbara Castle to make it happen. But then it did happen. Now you got
not
still
entirely.
Yeah, it hasn't happened properly. But look.
Not the best example of change that Ed Miliband could have come up with. Let's be honest, 45 years later and we're still looking for equal pay for women. That's because the corporations have held that back to allow them to increase their profits.
It's all about, how does progress come? Progress comes through people demanding change,
yes,
politics responding, not all the way, and people pushing for that change to carry on. But
this is why nothing ever changes in this country, because people demand change, and Ed Miliband openly says there that politics responds, but not all the way. That's why nothing ever changes, because they just tweak around the edges. They're not interested in fundamental change. The likes of Ed Miliband and David Cameron are there to ensure that the establishment hold this country firm. He's just said it there. If you want change, you're going to get a little bit of change, maybe 5%. Throw a few crumbs off the table.
Without the politics, and this is maybe just part of our, not exactly disagreement, part of the issue here, without politics, without government, the change doesn't happen.
No, change would happen. We'd probably storm Parliament and cut your head off. Politicians are there to seduce the public into making them believe that they are going to change the status quo, when in reality they are there to maintain the status quo.
That's what happens in a democratic society.
Absolutely. Now, the frustrations that I was describing, Ed, and the thing that I think is the core of the modern issue when it comes to the disengaged and the disenfranchised people in this country at the moment, what we see is bankers committing flagrant fraud, no one going to prison. HSBC committing fraud and helping people avoid tax, nobody going to prison, no consequences.
Okay, before we get on to HSBC, I'm not trying to avoid the question.
But he does, in fact, avoid the question.
But do you accept my fundamental point?
The NHS, yeah. The NHS, of course these things are important, Ed.
Yeah.
I think these are valuable points. My mother's only alive as a result of the National Health Service.
Exactly.
So what we are talking about now is, in the age of PFI, in the age of continuing privatisation of these public institutions.
Did you notice that as soon as Brand mentioned PFI, watch Ed Miliband shift really uncomfortably? Because he knows he's as bad as the Tories when it comes to privatising the NHS.
In the age of PFI, in the age of continuing privatisation of these public institutions, of the transference of power and wealth from ordinary people to the richest 1% and beyond to corporations and super elites, what can, as you have said, politics and people have to work in harmony. Now, the people have made their disillusionment clear, their frustration clear, their loss and despair clear.
Have people made their disillusionment clear? Their frustration clear? Their loss and despair clear? I'm not sure they have. Yeah, we've had a few people stand up for what they believe in, but most people are just going to vote the way that their parents have voted. I mean, this morning's poll, apparently, puts the Tories 5 points ahead of Labour, meaning that 35% of the country are still going to vote Tory, despite the fact that they will destroy the country. That clearly shows that we haven't shown our disillusionment, we haven't shown our frustration, and we haven't shown our loss and despair.
You, as a politician, as the potential leader of the country, what are you going to do to take on those powerful forces that we believe are beyond politics?
Okay, but I promise you I'm not avoiding the question here. But
well, then you've got to answer it,
I
mate.
will answer it, but there's two issues here.
And I bet neither of those two issues that Ed Miliband is about to bring up are going to answer Brand's question about the powerful forces that are above politics.
Does politics make change happen? And what scale of change are we talking about?
Yeah.
Neither of those two topics seem to have anything to do with Brand's question about powerful forces that are above politics.
Now, the problem I had with some of the things that you said is you've implied that the first is like there's no change happens. Well, it's just like wrong. It's just wrong.
Well, I suppose Miliband is right. Change has happened. I mean, we don't live in caves anymore, do we? Well, most of us, anyway.
Change has happened, and it will happen.
Yeah.
Now, let me come to your
point. My main point is, will you confront those powerful interests? Because, of course, like, you know, there's no one in Britain that doesn't love the NHS. There's no one in Britain that would have wanted 5,000...
but it was politics that had made it happen.
Well, no, as you said, it was ordinary people
and
pushing politics.
And politics.
Great, so politics is a given, people is a given. How are we going to work harmoniously to deliver what the people of Britain need right now? And what the people of Britain need is someone that's going to say, you lot, don't you worry about HSBC, don't you worry about bankers, I'm your man, I'm going to go in there and take care of this stuff.
My whole argument in this campaign, I think this is the central thing that we've got to confront as a country, is who is the country run for? Is it just run for the richest and most powerful?
Yep.
Or is it run for working people?
Nope.
I think that's the biggest question that we face as a country. I actually think it's the biggest question that most Western countries face. It's rooted in inequality, an unequal society. I think a more equal society is a more successful society. And that's why we need to have a system and a plan, that's what we've got in this election, to change the way the country works.
How do we do that, Ed? How do we do that? How do we sort of like...
I mean, look, well, you reform the banks, but we need banks that are going to work for businesses. I mean, banks are a good thing, not a bad thing.
Could we see bankers going to prison for like some of the rate rigging, the LIBOR scandal?
Of course, if there's fraud committed by bankers.
It's evident that there was.
Of course, if there's fraud committed by bankers, that should happen. But there's a bigger issue than that, which is how you have a banking system that works for your ordinary small businesses that need the help, for your customers that need the help, and that's what our plan does.
If you jail the bankers who have committed the fraud, who caused the financial collapse in the first place, then you would clean the city up from these fraudulent bankers who've been robbing us for years. You'd clean up the system, which is clearly corrupt and has government support, cross-party government support, because Labour supported the banks just as much as the Tories did. These bankers have got billions in bonuses. Maybe if we cleaned up the scum from the banking system, we would have this utopia banking system that you talk of, Ed, but it starts with the rest in the bankers. You cannot just let the bankers get away with everything they do. What message does that send to everybody? Not just the banking industry, but to everybody. It means you can commit fraud, you can get support from the government, and you'll get away with it. It's utterly disgusting. That's a really poor, vague answer, Miliband.
The energy companies, we want energy companies that are successful, but we also need energy companies that aren't ripping people off and are giving people a fair deal. We want to confront the tax avoiders. We want to make sure that people don't avoid their taxes. The non-doms, the people who live in this country, work in this country, permanently settled in this country. It's what I say, it shouldn't be sort of one rule for the richest and most powerful, another rule for everybody else. It's one rule for everybody. And that's the sort of society I believe in.
My God, he talks so much pie in the sky, doesn't he? He needs to look back at his party's track record, and he needs to start apologising for the way his party, over 13 years, destroyed this country. I can't feel any passion coming from Ed Miliband. I can only hear plastic scripted answers about what he believes in, etc. It's all nonsense. And I'm really surprised that Brand isn't pushing him further on the questions that Miliband has so far avoided answering.
Do you? That's because I think that's what a lot of us feel is tough to get purchase on. Like, for example, it's like the 850 billion that it cost to bail out the banks in 2008. Like, during the time since then, we've lost 840 billion to tax evasion. So, like, that's the kind of money that's available to be captured, which in a way sort of challenges the myth of austerity.
It was right to bail out the banks.
Right. I mean,
because it wasn't about the banks; it was about ordinary people's savings. You remember those queues starting to form, Northern Rock and all that. I mean, that's about ordinary people's savings and what was going to happen to ordinary people's savings.
So in a way, like within the current political paradigm, we do have no choice.
We do have a choice, Brand. Let's do what Iceland did. Let's arrest the bankers. Forgive me, but I thought Brand was a system changer. I thought he wanted to bring about change. He's just Miliband's poodle in this interview.
This feeling, which I suppose Nigel Farage capitalises on, of like ordinary people aren't, it doesn't seem like there's a real choice, so that in the end when someone with a pint on their head turns up, it seems like a valid and interesting
I'm not planning to do
alternative.
that.
Love him or hate him, at least Farage isn't as plastic as Miliband or Cameron. At least he's got some passion about him. At least he comes across as if he cares.
No, I don't think that's not your speech.
I'm not sure I'd look so good with a pint on my head.
But you'd look better with a pint over your head.
I don't think either of us would benefit from a balancing act at this moment.
Exactly.
Unless it's a sort of an economical balancing act, Ed, which is something that we really need to look at. No, like, so what it feels like to us.
Brand keeps using the word us and we when he addresses a question to Miliband. Since when did we, or all of us, allow him to speak for us?
Is that whoever it is in power, those people don't operate on behalf of us, ordinary people. They operate on behalf of transnational corporations, and they operate on behalf of the financial industry. It sort of feels like, what we feel like is, there's nothing that can be done. Why is this not happening? We see these things unfold, and then there's no one goes to prison. Things don't get any better. No one proposes an alternative.
That's because career politicians protect the establishment. They may go into the Houses of Parliament with all good intentions, but as soon as they get in there, they realise how much gravy there is to be made, and they soon change their tune and forget all about their constituents and just do what the party wants. And the party wants to maintain the status quo. It's not interested in change. It doesn't matter who gets into power, Cameron, Miliband, God forbid Nick Clegg, the establishment still get in.
That's the area.
There is an alternative, and look, it's all about, do you learn the lessons?
Oh, there is an alternative, is there, Ed? Go on, tell us.
Look, for me, and it's different for you, obviously, it's about how do you make practical change happen, practical change that people can believe in. Now, practical doesn't mean sort of non-existent. It doesn't mean not real. It means, a higher minimum wage. That is about saying, look, let's tackle inequality. Hard work should be rewarded for everybody in our country. 0 hours contracts, you probably know about 0 hours contracts. People who
all this lot are on them.
Don't know. I'm sure they're not. I hope they're not. Otherwise, I'm get very angry with you. Look.
So the alternative that Ed Miliband says is high minimum wage and no 0 hour contracts. I'm sorry, that's no way near close enough to the alternative political system that people want to see. It's just party lines being spewed by Miliband, and sadly, Brand is being sucked in. He's not challenging him. It's really, really disappointing to watch.
It is about saying, is a text message at 6 a.m. in the morning to tell you whether you got work or not, is that a good way to run a country?
No, it's not a good way to run a country. But neither is the government allowing the likes of the Royal Bank of Scotland, that they own 84% of, having paid $46 billion for it in 2008 because of the bankers' financial collapse, neither is allowing them to lose £49.7 billion in 7 years and still allow them to pay hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in bonuses for a pathetic, useless performance. But mark my words, this will not change under a Labour government. They will continue to allow the bankers to rob us and rape us. And I also reckon 0 hour contracts will continue under Labour as well.
That's where we made progress on workers' rights, but we've sort of gone backwards.
Yeah.
The NHS, opportunities for young people. This isn't like bread and butter of politics. This is what really matters to people.
For me, what I have learned is like sort of because of geopolitical influences, because of global finances, it seems that it's very difficult at a domestic level to leverage serious influence. So when we have a party...
It's just not true.
I'm not sure doing a Hulk Hogan impression is going to help answer this question. So if it's not true that because of geopolitical influences and because of global finances we can't wield any influence domestically, why haven't we done it then? It's because corporations are above governments. Profit before people, every time. Miliband can't and won't change anything. A Prime Minister is like a shop manager. He can adjust a few things here and there, but the real power lies with the franchise owner, the corporations, who don't need to get elected. They just need to spend a few pennies buying a few politicians.
So you are in a position to confront these powerful organisations, the financial industry, transnational corporations, like say for example, this little stat.
Can I just put it in a particular way to you, right? Which you may not like.
Well, it's better for me to put it in your language, and it's better for me to put it in my language, because if you can understand me, it's better.
Okay, fine.
Right. Say for example, right, like sort of average UK worker pays 20% normal tax, right?
Sure.
Amazon paid 0.05% on 4 billion sales.
Yeah, we've got to
do
deal
we
with
have
that.
the power to do that?
Of course you do.
How?
How exactly?
Well, first of all, you've got to do it internationally.
Yeah.
Because these companies are mobile around the world, and that is hard yards, but you've got to do it.
Utter nonsense.
And secondly, you've got to be willing to act on your own way you can. Look, there are different countries that have different ways of dealing with these things. Some are more successful than others. So of course there are ways to deal with it. It doesn't mean it's easy in a world where capital and companies are mobile. Of course you can deal with these things. And of course people share your outrage about companies that don't pay their taxes, and it can be dealt with. But you've got to have a government that is willing to say there's something wrong with this and we're going to deal with it.
You're that government.
Yeah.
There we go, all our problems solved. We can go back to bed.
Now, I know you've had a bit of a scrap with Rupert Murdoch before. There's no love lost between me and him. Like I've said this before to politicians. What it feels like, and I hope it doesn't sound adolescent, but what it feels like to us is like, if Rupert Murdoch has this kind of power, this kind of media voice, if you are like the Prime Minister of Britain, can't you just go, right, I'm Prime Minister now, we're passing some legislation that means that monopolies are going to be significantly broken up. So Rupert Murdoch, it's been great, but now you can only own 10% or 15% of total media. Is that kind of thing a possibility? Because people want it.
We said in our manifesto you've got to look at these issues of media ownership and all that. And you know, I've spoken out against Rupert Murdoch on phone hacking and what happened to ordinary members of the public who were victims of phone hacking and intrusion and all of those things.
I take it from your ramble there, Ed, that no, you cannot do anything about Murdoch and breaking up his monopoly.
The thing I'd say to you though about this, these people are less powerful than they used to be.
Yeah, I get that.
They're less powerful than they used to be.
What? You get that, Brand, do you? You've done hundreds of videos saying exactly the opposite to what you've just agreed with. You seem to have been really sucked in by Ed's plastic, party line, vague answers.
But still a bit too powerful.
Yeah, look, media ownership really matters. It's something I care about. As I say, we've set out in our manifesto that we're going to definitely look at the issue. But
are you able to make proper pledges or not? Because it's too
Well, I'm not making
edgy.
a pledge in that. No, it's not about edgy. You've got to look at how you make it work properly. Of course you've got to look at that. Look, I'm not diminishing Rupert Murdoch, right?
You should be diminished.
Yeah, but
diminish him down.
Yeah, okay, but he's much less powerful than he used to be.
So by increasing his influence in the UK's media, Murdoch has now become less influential. How does that work? I think with the Tories polling at 35%, that statement is completely incorrect. Isn't it, Ed? You should have won this election months ago. You should have been 50 points ahead in the polls with what the Tories are proposing to do and have done to the country so far. But they're not because of Murdoch's influence. But he's got no power at all, has he, Ed?
The British people have a lot more sense than some of these papers give them credit for.
Well, there's no doubt about that, but it's still a concern when you've like someone in Murdoch's power who's in like, because what it feels
and
like
you've got to be willing to stand up to these powerful forces, and I am.
Are you willing to?
Yeah.
I think the last person to stand up to these powerful forces was JFK, and look what happened to him.
The reason I have never voted in my life is because I think it don't matter which one. We all got excited about Tony Blair. We all got excited about Barack Obama. What happened?
Obama? Who's he? Again, Brand is using we, us. I wasn't excited about Tony Blair. I wasn't excited about Barack Obama. Speak for yourself, Brand, and stop believing your own press, thinking that you're speaking for the country, because you're not.
But hang on a minute. Look, this is an important point. I'm not looking for euphoria, right? I know that sounds a bit weird. Obviously, I want to get rid of the Tory government, and that's going to be a very good thing for the country.
Believe me, Ed, there will be no euphoria if you get into 10 Downing Street. Honestly, it's like, do you want cat shit for tea or dog shit for tea?
First of all, you don't want politicians saying, vote for me and on day one the world is transformed. It ain't going to be like that, right? It ain't going to be like that. Change is hard, right?
Yes.
Change takes time, and I'm not being a civil servant. I'm just saying that that's the reality. That's the first point. Secondly, change happens not in a kind of, it requires pressure.
Oh, I like that. Let's hear that again.
And it takes effort, and it takes people to demand the change to happen. So
Just how many people does it take to demand change though, Ed? Is it more than the 1.2 million people who marched on London in 2003 to stop the fraudulent Iraq war? Just how many people do we need to convince the government that we need change? 2 million? 10 million? 67 million? Maybe we need to borrow some French people and let's get it up to 80 million. Would that be enough for change, Ed?
I'm not looking for euphoria. I'm looking for, a sense of this is real, concrete, deliverable change. But I actually think that's what people want. I think that we're in a world where people are past the idea of, this bloke comes along and he says, vote for Ed Miliband, and if I'm in Downing Street on day one, life is kind of totally turned upside down. First of all, I don't think people want it.
Patronising prick.
And secondly, I don't think people would believe it. I think people want, kind of a sense that the country's run in a different way, that it's run for them again. I think the fundamental problem with this country is that people think it's run for somebody else, and the somebody else is probably somebody right at the top of society. They've got the access, the influence, the power, and it's not run for them. And that's what we've got to change.
That is exactly it. That is exactly it.
Russell, you've got the access, the influence, and it could be run for the population rather than just for big business and corporations. But when you were asked on Question Time to stand for Parliament, look what you said.
Stand. Stand for Parliament. If you're going to campaign, then stand. Okay? Okay, you have the media profile for it. Do it.
My problem would be, mate, I'd stand for Parliament, but I'd be scared that I'd become one of them.
What we need to feel, normal people, is that there is the will in politicians, that they're getting into politics not because of cronyism, not because of careerism, but because they want to represent ordinary people in the face of powerful elites that seem to somehow be beyond the grasp of ordinary politics, whether it's the financial sector, this sort of housing crisis that's going on in London, where it's before our eyes being socially cleansed of ordinary people, while empty towers that are essentially money, never built to be lived in, are erected all over the place. There's a real sense that how is this happening?
It's because of the system. The whole political system needs to change. They go to Parliament with good intentions, they get seduced by the money, blackmailed even, I'm sure that goes on, and then they do what the party want them to do, which is to maintain the status quo. That's for big business, for banks. It's nothing to do with helping the general public. You even said yourself that you'd be afraid that you would turn into one of them if you went to Parliament.
There's nothing we can do, and I completely agree with you, Ed. We don't want some sort of giddy yes we can euphoria. We want a bloke who's going to say, look, I'm in this for the right reasons, I'm prepared to take on Murdoch, I'm prepared to take on HSBC, I'm prepared to take on the powerful elites that have got control of the Tory party, that if the Tory party are given any longer in charge of this country, could drive it into the ground, the very fabric of society itself being torn apart by them and the vested interests of powerful elites.
Do you really believe that Miliband is going to take on Murdoch? He's going to take on HSBC, and he's going to take on the powerful elites? Really? Well, I'm afraid you're going to be very disappointed, Mr. Brand.
I think people don't want euphoria this time.
Well, they definitely ain't going to get it with Miliband.
I think people want security and stability and an end to that fear.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree with you that the prospect of another 5 years of the Tories is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Incredibly dangerous for who the country works for. It's incredibly dangerous for the NHS. It's incredibly dangerous for...
Least we forget that Ed Miliband has signed up to cut just as much as the Tories, but over a slightly longer period.
I think their fundamental view is that the only way we succeed as a country is low pay, insecurity for most people, and, the wealthiest get their tax cuts and the wealth trickles down to somebody else. And that's what we've got to change about the country. And we can change it. And look, I think we need to encourage people to vote and be part of that change, not on the basis, as you say, of giddy euphoria, but on the basis of things can be. Look. I've got this simple idea, which is Britain can be better. The Tories want to say this is as good as it gets for the country. And this isn't as good as it gets for the country. This can't be as good as it gets for the country. And I think that is about where the stakes are.
I get that Ed Miliband tried to get down with the cool kids and to appeal to Brand's followers, a lot of whom I doubt are going to vote. But this interview just cemented the fact that our political system is made of plastic. Our leaders are so one-dimensional. We need to just kick the lot out and start again. How we do that, I have no idea. Just what is Miliband gonna deliver? He's gonna deliver nothing. It's going to be more of the same. He's already signed up for £30 billion worth of cuts. He's going to do exactly what the Tories want to do, but just over a slightly longer period. Nothing will change. It's laughable to think that Miliband is going to take on Murdoch. It's laughable to think that Miliband is going to take on the banks. It's laughable to think that Ed Miliband is going to take on the power elite and the multinational corporations, when we have a trade deal like TTIP being written in secret by the same corporations that Miliband wants to take on. He hasn't got a chance. TTIP puts corporations on top of the tree, above national governments, above people, and even above the planet. Miliband will get nowhere going after these. If Miliband gets into number 10, we should revisit this interview in a few years to see just how slow Ed Miliband's change has been. So slow, no doubt, that you'll be forgiven for thinking that nothing has changed at all. I was also very disappointed with Russell Brand in this interview. He asked some good questions, to be fair. He had more passion than dead Ed, but he let Ed off with plastic, rehearsed, vague answers, almost all the way through it. Even when Brand asked him the same question twice, he still let him spew his vagueness. But Brand seemed really passionate about his vagueness. It was bizarre. Miliband said exactly what Brand wanted to hear. I can imagine Ed Miliband would have spent ages rehearsing and making sure he said just what Brand wanted. And frankly, I'm surprised at how sucked in by it Brand seemed to be. He seemed to be all smitten with him at times in this interview. He was almost Star Trek at having Ed Miliband round for tea to sit by his kitchen sink. I didn't hear anything new from Miliband. I heard empty promises after empty promises. Just because Miliband says it is so, doesn't mean it will be. The system needs changing, not tweaking here and there, fundamental change.